and welcome. So I'm out today on another Peak District adventure. Parking the car today in Alston field, which is in the Staffordshire part of the Peak District, and I've since walked the 2 miles or so down through Milldale up onto the tops overlooking the River Dove down below. But you've probably guessed from the title of this video that today I'm here to talk about the Pennine Way adventure that I completed just over 2 weeks ago now. For those that watched the series of videos, I did promise a reflections video once the dust had settled. So that's what I'm going to look to do today. I've not scripted anything for this. I am going to just speak off the cuff really. I know the kind of things I want to cover. I will put some chapter links in this video just in case it ends up being a long one and you just want to kind of focus on specific things that I'm going to cover. Right, it was an emotional experience. I'm looking forward to reflecting on it and capturing it all on video today. Let's do it, shall we? So before we get into it, I think the first thing that I need to say is a massive thank you. Thank you to all of those people that watched the series of videos every day. Thanks to those people that commented and gave me words of encouragement throughout. It really did help make a difference on those days when the going was tough. And also a special thank you to those that donated to the charity fundraising appeal. I think, as I'm making this video today, I think so far I've raised just under £600, which, you know, to say I didn't really promote it or anything, you know, that's really appreciated, and I'm sure will be put to good use by the Mind charity. So I thought I'd start off by summarising some of the main highlights. The first one being the obvious one, actually getting to the end. As people probably picked up through the videos, probably took until I got to the halfway point before I truly started to believe I could make it. I went in with the foot injury, you know, thinking I probably wouldn't get past the first day. So getting to the end, that will certainly rank high up there in kind of my list of achievements in life. Secondly, the weather. I mean, I can't believe how fortunate I was with the weather. I think in the entire 15 days, I think I probably had about 4 or 5 hours of rain in total. A bit of a thunderstorm on the first day, which thankfully waited until I was descending off Torside. And then I think the only other bad rain was about an hour and a half of fairly persistent rain when I was on Crossfell and I descended down past Greg's Hut. That could have been much worse, you know. I do think with adventures such as the Pennine Way, the weather probably makes a difference. You know, I imagine if the weather was horrendous, it could have probably been quite miserable. Thankfully it wasn't. In fact, the weather started to break up on the day I returned, and I think since then the temperatures have plummeted, and it's rained a lot, so, you know, very fortunate. And I think the third highlight was some of the people that I met along the way. I mean, the trail wasn't particularly busy when I did it because I left it until September, but I did meet some fantastic people. Obviously George, and Toby. Who can forget Toby? And I had a lot of admiration for George and Toby. They were carrying everything, including the kitchen sink, in their rucksacks. How they even moved, let alone walked 270 miles, I'll never know. George in particular, the adversity that he faced, the issues he had with his blisters, he had to take a rest day, but his story, in fact the story of all of the people I met, I just love to hear them. George carrying the ashes of one of his close friends, Toby on his very first ever long distance trail. There was countless stories from people I met, and it made it such a special experience. So I think they're the three key highlights for me. So I need to have a think about things that perhaps weren't quite as much fun for me. Once I've got through this stile, it's quite narrow. So if I had to think of things that I perhaps enjoyed less about the trail, there wasn't that much. If you watch the videos, you'll have seen there was a couple of days where I was a little bit flat, but I think that was mainly because those days followed an epic day. So the one that sticks in my mind was the day where I went from Alston to Greenhead, I think it was. I don't remember now. That was quite a low level day, walking through some featureless moorland. But even that day, the weather that day was stunning. So it was hard to get too down about it. And of course, that was the day I bumped into Toby as well. So when I was struggling towards the end of that walk, being able to share those last few miles with him, you know, really helped. Obviously there was a couple of days towards the end where it started to get quite boggy. I'm glad they were towards the end, because I did start to develop a blister on the penultimate day through a couple of days of wading through bogs and having wet feet. But other than that, you know, it's so difficult to really get too down about anything, because every day was a new adventure. Every day beyond Black Hill was something I'd not seen before. So yeah, I would say 99% of the experience was absolutely fantastic, as is the River Dove. I love walking alongside here. So I thought I'd run through the 15 days, the kind of highlights of each day. So day one, Edale to Crowden, obviously took me along a very familiar path. As a Peak District walker, you know, I'd kind of covered every inch of that path on a number of walks previously, but it was great really to start the Pennine Way in a place that I was comfortable with. In fact, I think the first day was the last day of the heat wave we had at the start of September. My biggest worry on that first day, apart from the issue with my foot, was the risk of thunderstorms. But thankfully, the Pennine Way god of weather mostly looked after me that day. He waited until I was descending down Torside at the end of the day before he decided to unleash them. Day two, again, part of day two took me along familiar territory up onto Black Hill. Quite a slow, challenging, gradual climb up onto Black Hill. It's a very rocky climb, boggy in places. But I was really excited on day two because I knew past Black Hill everything was a brand new adventure for me. The one downside with day two was the 3-mile walk I had to Delph when I got to the end of the Pennine Way part of the trail that day. But it was a relatively short day, so it wasn't too bad. So day three took me from Delph, although I did get a lift up to the start of the trail, and over to Hebden Bridge. I'm going to have to pause you. There's a group of walkers that need to pass me in a second. So where was I before I was rudely interrupted by that group of walkers there? Yeah, so day three, over to Hebden Bridge, where I passed Studley Pike Monument. Day three is memorable for the nightmare I had trying to find my accommodation at the end of the day. where using the Apple Maps to try and locate the B&B took me to the wrong place. So that day should have been a relatively short day, ended up being about 19 miles because of the unnecessary extra miles I had to do. But it was a great day. I think that day I also crossed the M62 bridge, and as we know, me and bridges where you can jump off, yeah, I like to give them a miss if possible. Day 4 from Hebden Bridge over to Cowling. So I think day 4, that was the day I got a little bit of rain, so I didn't get the fantastic views of the Yorkshire Dales that you normally get as you're making your way over there. And I think day 4 was also the day I first met George. We stayed on the same campsite in Cowling. That was the day I stayed in that funky little shepherd's hut. Day 5. So day 5, where did I go on day 5? I'm having to remember all this without looking at the map. That was it. Day 5, I went over to Kirkby, Malham. That was fairly uninspiring day from what I remember. It was a lot of farmland walking, and I think that was the day that I stopped for some chips in Gargrave, which helped boost my mood. And I bumped into George again. I think we both restopped in Gargrave, and then we walked the last few miles together. So, what I didn't know at the time, when I left George behind at Kirkby Malham, that would be the last day I'd actually see him on the trail. So the following day, and I forgot what day number we're on already, that took me from Kirkby Malham over to Horton in Ribblesdale. From memory, a day I was very fortunate with the weather. I seem to remember that day there was a band of really heavy rain started in Yorkshire and working its way south, and I just seemed to miss it. I think parts of the country had floods that day, so yes, I was extremely fortunate. The only time I got any rain was when I got onto Pennine. My scramble to the top wasn't rewarded with any views, unfortunately, but I'll take that all day long. That day could have been much worse. And of course, that day I saw the magnificent Malham Cove for the first time. What a sight, spectacular sight that was. I'm definitely going to go back there and do some more walking around that area. You just have to bear with me. In fact, I'm going to pause you whilst I walk past this noisy waterfall. So from Horton in Ribblesdale, I made my way over to Hawes. I think that day was the start of a really nice 2 or 3 day spell of weather. From what I remember, it was a fairly steady day that. There wasn't a massive amount of climbing on that day. It was just a really nice, pleasant walk through the Yorkshire Dales National Park. Obviously, you had a sight of the Ribblehead Viaduct, but from quite a distance. The trail doesn't go kind of directly past it. And that day, I remember, I think Hawes is a popular rest stop for a lot of people. There's quite a few places to visit there, such as the Wensleydale Cheese Factory. I paid a visit to the chip shop that night. That's the thing I remember most about that day. The following day was from Hawes over to Tan Hill. A fantastic day. One of my favourite days on the Pennine Way. That the weather again was beautiful. I had some fantastic views from the top of Great Shunner Fell. And I remember stopping for some tea and cake in Thwaite, and then the climb out of Thwaite onto the tops again. That section, that 4 or 5 mile section, that took my breath away. I absolutely loved it up there. And then you descend down past some waterfalls before going back up onto the moors again and up to Tan Hill. And that night,
I didn't stay at the Tanhill Inn, so I had to use a taxi to get me back to my accommodation in Kirkby Stephen and drop me off again the next morning. So the following day I left the magnificent Yorkshire Dales National Park behind and walked from Tanhill over to Middleton in Teesdale. Another day where I was quite fortunate because from what I understand, those moors between Tanhill and Bowes can get really boggy, but obviously September had been a very dry month, so yeah, no such issues. I think that day was the day that I started to believe that I was going to make it to the end, started to get some confidence and self-belief. I passed the halfway point, and I remember finding a little refuge shelter on the moors when I'd crossed gone through the underpass on the A66, and it was quite an emotional moment for me in that shelter because a lot of people who'd walked the Pennine Way previously had wrote kind of inspirational and motivational messages, as well as funny messages, on the wall in that shelter. And I spent a bit of time reading them, and I think it finally started to dawn on me that, you know, how far I'd already walked, how many days I'd been walking for. I was feeling physically and mentally strong, and I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to do this. But not wanting to get overconfident. And I think that day, I don't think I saw anybody either until about the final mile or two. It was a really quiet day in terms of remote walking that day. So obviously I descended into Middleton in Teesdale, found pizza, which I'd been craving all week, and prepared myself for 2 long 20+ mile days. Starting with the following day, where I walked from Middleton Teesdale over to Dufton. That was it. I mean, that day, that's definitely in my top 3 days of the Pennine Way. You know, the walk alongside the Tees, past High Force, Low Force, Cauldron Snout, absolutely fantastic. And of course, that day ended with a walk up to the magnificent High Cup Nick, where I was on my own. I remember sitting there, looking down High Cup Nick, with my shoes and socks off, traumatising you all with views of my feet. I remember looking down there and just struggling to take it all in. What a fantastic place it was. Right, I'm going to cross over this stile here, give my arm a rest because it's aching. 3 minutes holding the camera out gives you arm ache, and then we'll talk about the next day where I tackled the mighty Cross Fell. Right, that's better. My arm's not aching now. So, as I mentioned, the following day took me up and over the mighty Cross Fell. A day where, unfortunately, the Pennine Way God of Views decided not to play ball. There was a lot of low cloud that day, and despite the rain staying away as I made my way up and over Cross Fell, unfortunately the low cloud meant that I had no views from the summit. So I dropped down to Greg's hut. Loved spending a bit of time in there, and then when I left Greg's hut, I think that's when I had the most prolonged period of rain. But thankfully, as I mentioned earlier, it held off until I descended, because you know, I can imagine it being quite brutal on the top of Cross Fell in bad weather. And the end of that day saw the sun finally reappear as I made my way into Alston, and not Alston as I kept calling it on the video. So thanks to the person who corrected my pronunciation there. So from Alston I made my way over to Greenhead. Yes, Greenhead. That was the day, probably the day where I was quite flat. There's a lot of featureless moorland, albeit a few lovely viaducts that I passed through in the first part of the walk. and I walked the last few miles with Toby that day. Having also, from memory, I had that extra 2 miles alongside the busy dual carriageway into Greenhead, where I stayed in a castle, the Blenkinsop Castle Inn, which was a great experience. So day 13, I think I've remembered what day we're up to now. It took me from Greenhead over to Bellingham, and obviously the first half of that walk was alongside the magnificent Hadrian's Wall, my first time on Hadrian's Wall, and that first 10 miles flew by. I loved it. It was obviously the busiest day on the Pennine Way. It's obviously a popular section of the Hadrian's Wall path there, but it was great to kind of walk alongside such history. The second half of that day, it was a long day. I think that was the second longest day of about 23 or 24 miles I think I walked that day. The second half was very boggy. Extremely boggy, walking through forestry tracks and over moorland. I didn't overly enjoy that second half of that day, and it's quite a draining day as well. Walking through bogs and kind of trying to pick a path around them. It takes its toll on a long day. I think it was a 10-hour day, that one. But the highlight, definitely Hadrian's Wall, and I'm going to go back and do some more of that, maybe even the full trail at some point in the future. So the penultimate day took me from Bellingham over to Byrness. Again, that was a fairly uneventful day. It was very windy. I think that was the start of the weather beginning to turn. It was an extremely windy day, and some of those heather-filled paths were quite challenging from what I remember. I think they kept trying to injure me. But I knew it was just kind of a nice, simple, easy day ahead of the final monster across the Cheviot, which takes me on to the final day, day 15, which I was nervous about because I knew it was a long day, but I was feeling fairly good, albeit I'd developed a blister by then. So, on the subject of that monster that is the Cheviot, the final day, day 15. I was a little bit nervous ahead of the final day because I knew gale force winds had been forecast. I knew it wasn't going to be a wet day, which I think was a real bonus, because gale force winds and rain up there would have been horrendous, and I'd have probably been cowering into my waterproofs, crying all day. But what a day it was! It was about, I think, 25 miles or 25 and a half miles in total. Very tough day, the toughest day of walking that I've done, definitely. The sheer amount of elevation gained and lost during that final day. In fact, I think if I'd have studied it beforehand, I probably would have thought, no, I'm going to split this last day in half. But I'm glad I took on the challenge, because it was a challenge, and it was a fitting finale to what is a really challenging trail. And yes, the winds were strong, the temperatures had dropped quite significantly, but it was a fantastic day. Obviously, my friend Simon joined me for the last few miles of that of the final day, so it was good when I got into Kirk, into the Border Hotel to get my free drink and my certificate. So obviously have a friend there to share the experience with. So that wraps up the 15 days. I mean, this video is probably really long. I know it is. So if you've watched all of it, treat yourself to a grenade bar. You've earned one. On the subject of grenade bars, that's definitely a highlight that I forgot to mention earlier. Quite a few people commented on how amusing they found my daily battles with grenade bars. What I forgot to film on the last days, I left all those I had in my rucksack in the final mountain refuge hut. They're probably still there, because I don't think anybody within the right mind will have picked one of those up to take away with them. I have got a few more left at home, so I might actually put them in some sort of Christmas hamper or something for somebody. Right, I'm going to go grab some lunch now, and then we'll wrap this video up with a few final reflections and maybe a few thoughts on what next. So, if I could only use one word to summarise my Pennine Way experience, what would it be? It would have to be amazing. That A word again. That A word got used a lot during the 15 videos. But it's only really been since I've got back and had a chance to kind of reflect on the 15 days that it's kind of dawned on me what I achieved. It was an absolutely fantastic adventure. And of course, my mind has now started to turn towards what's next. I had originally thought about possibly doing something before the clocks go back in October, but I'm just so busy with work at the moment and there's just a lot going on that I just haven't got time. So I think realistically it'll probably be from next spring onwards before I'm able to tackle another long distance trail. The obvious one that springs to mind is the coast to coast. That's obviously not quite as long as the Pennine Way, but probably equally as challenging, particularly the first half of it as you go through the Lake District. So that's something I've considered. Possibly the Hadrian's Wall Trail, and a few people did make some suggestions in the video comments of trails that I might like to consider, so I'm going to research into some of those during the winter months. And make some plans, obviously, for next year's charity/trail attempt. But the kind of immediate priorities, I really need to get myself back out on another wild camp. I just completely put them on the back burner during the period I was training for the Pennine Way, and I want to at least get out on one before we really get into the depths of winter. And then in terms of winter camping, if I'm going to have a go at that, I'll really need to buy some kit that will obviously keep me nice and warm during the winter months. But anyway, therefore future adventures. If you've got any questions, by the way, around the Pennine Way and my kind of experiences along the trail, pop them in the video comments. If there's quite a few questions that are raised, I might consider doing a bit of a Q&A video at some point. But for now, thanks for joining me on this trip down, I was going to say memory lane, but it's only 2 weeks ago, so that's probably the wrong choice of words. But thanks for joining me on my reflections of what was a fantastic 2 weeks. There'll be a link to the playlist of videos in the video description if you haven't seen them yet. Otherwise, thanks for watching this one. I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.